Hello and welcome to Tommy Talks TV, the place to be to build great love relationships. As always, I'd like to start by saying a very big thank you for all your likes and your shares and your comments on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. I really appreciate you because you're helping us spread the message further faster. So thank you very much indeed. Now today I'm going to be taking one of your questions and it goes like this. Please, could you address the issue of newly wedded couples, challenges, what to expect, how to adjust, and so on? Now, this is an excellent question. In fact, thinking about this question, I thought, well, maybe I would do a longer series at some point in time. But to answer your question today, there are three key things that I will suggest to you that will help you as you enter into the new state of being married to someone else. The first of them is this: expect surprises. So the relationships that are most resilient and that usually make it for the longest are relationships where the two people that enter into the relationship actually expect surprises as they enter into the relationship. Relationships where people expect everything to fall into place automatically, where they expect everything to work out from day one, those are usually the relationships that face the greatest amount of challenges, because the reality is this: there will be surprises. Regardless of how long you've known this person, there will be surprises. I courted my husband for 7 years and there were still surprises. Some things that I did that were a surprise to him. There were some things that he did that were a surprise to me, and there was still that process of learning how to deal with those surprises. So I also find that maybe for newly married couples, one of the biggest surprises that women usually confront when they get married to their husbands is just how important sex is to a man. I think that most women don't quite grasp that until they get married and suddenly realize just how frequently a man desires and expects sex in relation to a woman. That's not always the case, but frequently it's the woman that is surprised because the husband has a higher sex drive than the wife does. On the other hand, you find that very frequently men are surprised by just how much emotional encouragement and input a wife expects. So many men feel, okay, well, they look at marriage sort of like a project. So you've done all you need to do, you've gotten her to the altar, you're married to her, and then you want to move on to the next project, which is maybe your career or things like that, and suddenly you find no, she actually wants you to spend time with her, to talk to her, to encourage her, she wants you to admire her, to say nice things to her. So that is a surprise to many men. And there are lots of other things that are surprises that could be cause for conflict. Things like financial habits, things like personality traits, how a person behaves, how they view life, things like that. So those are things that you should expect in marriage. And if you expect them, knowing that opposites will always tend to attract, then that puts you in a better position to be able to deal with them, which is my next point, which is deal with your differences. Now that you've found all the surprises and you've recognized that there are differences between the two of you, how are you going to deal with those differences? Because that is what is going to make the difference between success and failure in your marriage. So there are generally three ways that people tend to deal with differences in a relationship. The first is to adapt. So when you adapt, you recognize that, well, this person is different from me. So their needs are different from mine, their desires are different from mine, their views are different from mine, and you just adapt because there are certain things about them that you have to accept wholeheartedly, because you cannot come from the position that, well, the way I want it is the way and that's the way it's supposed to be. No, you have to recognize that that person is different. So you've got to be prepared to adapt to how they're different from you. So for instance, I say if your spouse wants sex more frequently than you do, then that's something you need to adapt to. You need to step up your game, because usually in that area particularly, it's the person who wants sex less that probably should up their game a bit so that they can meet the needs of the other person. Or if your wife wants to be talked to, she wants to be encouraged, well, or she wants to hear I love you very frequently, well, that may not be something that you're used to doing all the time, but then you've got to be prepared to adapt to it. So adaptation is crucial. Or sometimes people negotiate. And there are some things in marriage that you need to negotiate. So for instance, now that you're married, all your finances are coming together and have become one. That's the way it should be in marriage. So now you need to talk about, well, how do we manage our finances? How are we going to spend, how are we going to apportion our finances? How are we going to maybe support family and things like that? Because maybe before you were married, you could send money to your parents without thinking about it or talking to anybody about it. But now you've got to negotiate and discuss these things with your spouse. Or maybe you could just go out to the shops and just buy things without thinking about them. But now that you're married, you've got to negotiate to know, okay, just how much can I spend without talking to my wife or talking to my husband about it. And you kind of negotiate your way through things like that. Or maybe it's things like, well, how are we going to spend the holidays? If there's a special occasion like Christmas and all that, do we spend them with his family? Do we spend them with her family? How exactly are we going to handle those things? So you've got to negotiate all those differences. So there are some things that you need to adapt to, some things that you need to negotiate. Now what you need to avoid is rejection. That's the third option. So people adapt, negotiate, or reject. If you reject, that means you just look at the differences and you say, well, no, my way is the way, or it's the highway, essentially. Or you're saying, look, this cannot be in this marriage. Now if it's something that is absolutely not scriptural, then obviously that needs to be rejected. But generally you should keep rejection out of your marriage and try to stick to adaptation or negotiation. So those are the three ways in which you deal with differences. And then the last of them is this: you've got to learn how to constructively manage conflict. So in every marriage there will be conflict, and usually if your courtship has been relatively harmonious, the first conflict you have is a big shock. It's like all of a sudden, wow, what happened here? You start to wonder, well, did I actually make a mistake in getting married and all that? Every relationship will have conflict, every marriage will have conflict, but how are you going to deal with the conflict? That's the question. Ideally, if you have spent your courtship time properly, then you should have already started the process of learning how to deal with conflict constructively, how to talk through situations, how to communicate. Because unfortunately sometimes people just enter into marriage without thinking about how to deal with conflict, and within the first few years of marriage they do so much damage to each other by the things they say and the way they behave in conflict situations, that it hurts the marriage, and then it takes a long process of healing before they can get back to the point where they can develop intimacy again. So you've got to learn how to manage your differences constructively so you don't do damage to the relationship. Well, I hope this has helped you. If this has helped you, then please leave me a message on Facebook or Twitter. And if you've got a question you would like me to answer, then head on over to tometalks.com/ask and I'll answer your question next time. See you next time. Bye bye.